Hi, I'm Dave Dinkel with the next 2-minute tip special series, and this one is I'm afraid of bleeding to death in a property. Now, if you listen to the previous one that I just did, I talked about get out of jail card, so on and so forth. But when would you bleed to death in a property? It's very simple. Ask any rehabber that's borrowed hard money what can happen. If you're wholesaling, your biggest loss that you can expect if you mess it up is simply your earnest money deposit. If you have it under contract with an end buyer, you can still make money when you go to closing, even if the end buyer doesn't come. I'll explain that in another one of these 2-minute tips that are never going to be 2 minutes. I'll call it 2 minutes just so I get your attention, but it's not going to happen. So on bleeding to death, you see a lot of TV shows. I shouldn't say you see a lot. I don't see many at all or none. But every time I walk by, every once in a while, a man's watching something flipping, flopping, fluing, or whatever else, and they rehab a property and turn a real junker into a magnificent thing, and they stand back and they sell it, and they make $50,000. Or in one case that I documented, they made $25,000 on a $600,000 plus property, and it didn't take into account the cost of money. And don't tell me they have no money, they use their own cash. They could have used that cash to make 20% on it doing something else easily in our industry. So they did lose money on the deal. But it doesn't matter. Look, somebody sold them that property. I funded some properties in Atlanta as a transactional funder. And I've said to the investor buyer coming in, this property is listed for less than what you're paying for it. You're paying more than the list price. He said, yeah, I know. I said, but what's the point here? And he said to me, well, these guys that rehab houses, I resell to them. And they tear the house down virtually and rebuild it. So as I looked at the pictures of this particular property in the house, I realized the house had already been rehabbed, and he was buying it at over the list price. Why? For the lot. Had a creek running through a special area and had a special city name on it that these people work in, and boom. So I funded it, got funded out the same day on my transactional funding, and whoever the flippers, floppers, floopers, or whatever else are out there, I hope they made money on it. Doesn't matter. We don't pay over list price under any circumstances, because when we go to put it out on our list, the list price is a glass ceiling. And I could get into how agents, figure I'm going to beat these guys, I'm going to reduce the list price. And we have answers for all that. We know that's going to happen. We know exactly what to do. So my point is very simply this. If you don't want to bleed to death, don't become a rehabber to begin with. One of the things I tell all my students, frankly, is you need to learn how to wholesale so you can cherry pick the best deals. And inevitably, they will go on to doing rehabbing. Okay, it's just inevitable. And sometimes they will do well, but many times they're going to come back to wholesaling. I got a call the other day from somebody that's been in our system for about 6 years, and the words out of her mouth, I picked up the phone, and she said, "You were right." I said, "What was I right about?" She said, "You told me not to landlord the property." So what had happened is, pre-tax deed sale, she got the property under contract for $30,000. Property's worth $125 on a bad day. And we went through the gymnastics, and great story, but I'm not going to get into it here. Got the property, and she called me up at the time and said, okay, I'm going to put a tenant in there. I can get it, I can rent it for $1,200 a month. I said, don't do that. She said, why not? I said, well, let's say you get $1,200 a month. So times 12 months is $14,000 a year. Let's call it $10,000 net. I'm giving you a break on what maintenance, repair costs, overhead, taxes, so on and so forth. I know I can make $10,000 net. I said, super. So if you can sell it for $110,000 from $30,000, you're taking out, I'm going to say $70,000 after expenses and everything else. That's 7 years worth of income with no tenants and toilets. I said, I know the story. You tell me that all the time, but it's just nice to have that cash flow every month. I said, okay, great. Well, what she called me to tell me was I was right, because the tenant she put in there had never paid her, and it took 7 months to evict a guy. So she put it up for sale the next day after she got him out of the property, and she got $115,000 for it. Boom. No tenants, no toilets, money in the bank. So you want to be a landlord? Help yourself. Nan and I have owned over 1,000 doors. So if your expectation is I'm going to own 50 doors, 100 doors, we've owned over 1,000 doors, but never, listen to this, never for more than a day. Why? We wholesale them. What do we make when we wholesale them? What are we leaving behind? Well, we're leaving behind headaches and aggravations. Tenants have more rights than the landlords. So if you're going to get in the landlord business, you're going to get into the legal business. Always have a manager, and never admit you own the property when you go by to check it. It's always the bad landlord that you work for. But more importantly, if you wholesale, I'll talk later in one of the series about how to estimate what price to offer. If you're going to wholesale, you should expect to take out between 2 and 3.5 years of net income at the closing table. And believe me, the landlord who's buying that from you is going to be extraordinarily happy with his cap rate. We don't think the cap rates of 8, 10, 12, 14, 15% are viable options and some other things that you can do in our industry. Can you bleed to death? Absolutely. And if you want to avoid that fear whatsoever, do not set yourself up for failure by being a rehabber, very simply. See you in the next 2-minute tip.